Alkhafaji.
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 Yeah.
Thank you, Alaa.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, hello everyone, and very nice to meet you all, even if it's virtually, and thanks for having me. So today I'll share our results of our first phase of this research is to measure the reaction of the university ecosystem to the pandemic, and with the case of Iraqi country. We are comparing analysis of students and teachers' perceptions. So I'll start with the introduction. As we all know, most universities around the globe were forced to switch from traditional face-to-face education to distance learning due to the outbreak of COVID-19, and Iraq was no exception. So we conducted an empirical study to investigate the reaction of the Iraq university ecosystem to the COVID-19 pandemic, where distance learning is considered a novel experience in Iraq. So the study design and methods we adopted in this research. So the purpose of this study is to compare the opinions of a large sample of both student and teacher populations of the Iraq universities to investigate, first, how an educational ecosystem operating in a cultural and infrastructural context like the Iraqi one reacted to such a rapid transition from the traditional education to distance learning. Secondly, which among the factors considered by this investigation might have influenced teachers and students' perception about technology-enhanced learning and, as well, their expectation for the future. So we use mixed method approach with data being gathered using a questionnaire technique to collect qualitative and quantitative data. However, only quantitative data are discussed in this paper. So how we designed our questionnaire? So the questionnaire adopted from a previous study, which was designed by SLERD. So it translated to Arabic. Then we got two experts to check the quality of the translation. And then we conducted a pilot study to measure also the quality of the translation. And then that was made available online, of course, due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 using Google Form. Okay, so the questionnaire consists of different types of questions, multiple questions, and open-ended questions, and Likert scale questions is different Likert, so 1 to 10, 0 to 100, and from -5 to 5 as well. Okay, so the participants were teachers, university teachers, and students, university students. So 48 questions were answered by 572 respondents, teachers, and 79 questions were answered by 2,746 students. The average age of teachers were 40, and most of students age between less than 22 to 26, most of them. Okay, so 4 groups of numeric variables were investigated, which related to technological context, readiness to the transition to distance learning, educational activities and operating conditions, and also future expectation and intentions. Okay, so how we analyze the data? So first, we clean the data, then we perform descriptive analysis using SPSS and R, and also data-driven investigation using R as well. Okay, so based on our results, so I'll summarize the result here, and I'll highlight the main outcome. So we identified the 3 themes. First, the participants who took part in the learning process. Secondly, the educational activities, and also the expectation for the future and the intention, how they expect this will be in the future. So first, so regarding the participants, it's very important to note that 65% of students used mobile phone to connect to connect and use and attend or use the distance learning, and also they connect through Wi-Fi. Sorry, 65% connect using Wi-Fi and 94% of them using their mobile phone. So one explanation is they don't want to buy a new device for using or participating in the distance learning, so they use their own device they have. And also it's important to note that most of participants needed 2 weeks to get used to from traditional face-to-face to distance learning. So this is very important regarding the participants theme. Also, the participants face some difficulties. The main difficulties they face is actually the poor network. So the network wasn't good, so was poor, even because of the limited bandwidth, or sometimes is limited power supply. So the electricity infrastructure in Iraq is not as good. Also limited platforms and applications to participate in distance learning. And home environment wasn't suitable for both participants, teachers, and students. For students, they mentioned they couldn't focus. They lost focus and concentration during the sessions, and also they couldn't communicate regularly with the professors. So these are the main difficulties participants face. So the second theme was educational activities. So we investigated a few variables. So these variables also adopted from the previous study. So as we can see, teachers are more positive in terms of focusing in educational activities. So delivering of transmissive lessons, teachers were 50% of teachers were positive, more than students, where students is 30%. Interactive lessons, 40% teachers versus 23% of students. Content production, 22 versus 18. Content sharing, 41 versus 28. Assign exercises, 36 versus 27. Carrying out exercises and assessment, 23 versus 23. 23 for assessment versus 18 students. Managing educational process, 20% versus 10%. So also we investigated the dynamics, reproduced dynamic classroom dynamics. So it wasn't as high. So it was relatively just above average. So it's 5%, 82 students, 6%, 8 teachers. And also workload increased by 49% to students and 57% for teacher. And this gives us an indication that might be the Iraqi context is not as suitable for distance learning as a normal process, as a normal things to do in Iraq. And this could be explained by the lack of infrastructure and also the poor network, because with the poor network is really difficult to hold a live sessions, a live lectures or webinar or something like this. So that's why it's actually it's needed more training, more infrastructure to be installed, and also it's clear that teachers need some training. They are not very familiar with technologies enhanced learning. So as we saw in the previous one, as we saw in the previous one, so students were more positive regarding the technologies than teachers. So in terms of previous experience of online learning, So students were 5.69, where teachers were 4.55. In terms of university readiness, students were more positive, so 7.23 versus teachers 6.95. In terms of technology adequacy of online learning environment is 6.45 versus 5.91, while teacher technology readiness was 6.22 versus this is student perspective, while teacher perspectives were 5.48, teacher pedagogy readiness 6.34 versus 5.65. University immaturity is 6.1 versus 5.71. So that might explain the workload increased by student and teacher, or maybe teacher is more because they needed more training to get familiar with the technology enhanced learning. And also this might explain why the reproduced classroom dynamic is just above average. Okay, so the last theme is perceived transformation and the future expectations and also intentions. So that wasn't very positive. So change in the idea of educational experience is 6.2 for students, 6.28 for teachers. Extent to which universities should rely on online learning is 6.11 versus 6.51. Sustainability is online learning is 5.63 versus 5.87, which is very understandable as the infrastructure wasn't good, so is not ideal, or is not we couldn't actually perform sustainability of online learning. So also the intention to work in smart working 5.92 versus 6.33. But there is a little hope. Improvement in the attitude towards technologies were a bit better. So 6.50 versus teachers 7.5. And also improvement in technological skills 6.67 versus 7.04. So that's give us an indication that students and teacher, both participants, manage to adapt to the transition to distance learning in such a short time, and also it might consider successful in terms of learning process. So also we performed causal chain network to observe some discovery. As we can see, is previous experience of online learning is high relevance in the students' perspective, and it's affects the reproduce classroom dynamics. So because they didn't have that much previous in online learning, so it's affected the reproduce classroom dynamic, and also is affected the change idea in using internet for learning as well. And that not the same case in the teacher, because previous experience in online learning wasn't as relevant, but is affected directly the reproduced classroom dynamic as well. These are the main discovery I wanted to highlight in the causal network, and this observation led to the formulation of a model of the attitude to engage in technological innovation. So as you can see at the top is the technological setting, so the e-maturity. So it includes technologies, infrastructure, competencies, and readiness and or vision of the e-maturity. From the model, so the solid lines was observed in either or in both teachers and students casual network. The dashed one only in students, while the dots only in teachers casual network. Okay, so the implications and challenges. We identify 3 themes as well. So is physical learning context, infrastructure, and pedagogy. So in terms of infrastructure, so the network was the main problem, the main obstacles for sustainability and to produce a dynamic classroom, as the live sessions was not possible because the network wasn't good, either because the bandwidth is limited or the electricity wasn't good, and also the devices were not available and not supplemented from the university, so they needed to have their own devices. So they relied on the device they own as well. The home environment was not an ideal option for online learning or for learning environment. Most of participants, particularly students, use shared room to attend classes. In terms of pedagogy, so pedagogical skills and competencies needed some training, especially for teachers. So they needed some training course to get used to technologies for enhancing the learning process. Okay, so that brought us to the conclusion of my presentation. So the conclusions is we can conclude that teachers and students managed to adapt to online learning after a short period of time. The experience with learning process could be considered successful, as confirmed particularly by student perception. But the big question here, how successful this experience was in terms of the quality of learning. So this needs further investigation, and we'll investigate this in the next step. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, this paper focused only on quantitative data. So we'll analyze the open-ended question and analyze qualitative data to discover how effective this process was in terms of learning effectiveness. And that's all from me. Thank you so much.
When you mentioned in your slide that there was a 2-week to shift from face-to-face and into the pandemic remote solution, I didn't notice you mentioning that there would be some delay, or this 2-week delay was related with some kind of pedagogical need to adapt, to transform some pedagogical approach. It was mainly technical or logistic. Is that right? Were you not able to do any pedagogical issue there?
Actually, what I meant is not to shift, is for participants to get used to the distance learning. Is not so. Is straight away the university wanted to shift, but yeah, as you mentioned, is the lack of infrastructure prevented them to be ready to shift, but also participants got used to distance learning, most of them by 2 weeks. So they started, I think 2 weeks after the pandemic, yes, but after this 2 weeks, they needed another 2 weeks to get used to use, to attend distance learning.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you still had an extra 2 weeks just to adapt to the new ecosystem, the new technology mediated instruments and so on. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So in fact,
and that because
that
because Iraq is considered considered a novel experience in Iraq. So in Iraq there was no distance learning at all.
Okay. Yes, and we also understood in your results in the student and teacher expectation is they would be keen to continue in this hybrid or remote setup, but most probably with other technologies, with other infrastructure, and with some other logistics also supporting them, I suppose, in that final result you had there. there's the kind
Yeah,
of an expectation. There are those two expectation questions, if they would
yeah,
be comfortable with that.
yes, they would, but actually we had a question is in the paper. I didn't present it. So we asked them if they would like blended learning or only online on return back to traditional. So 48% of them wanted to return back to traditional, actually. 28% of them wanted blended learning. As I remember, I think 28% wanted just online learning.
Okay.
But yeah, I think they would to carry on online learning if they do have the right infrastructure and equipment.